Tonight, you slip quietly through the stone gates of a medieval abbey, where silence hums louder than words and daily life moves as slowly as candle wax melting in the dark. The sound of your own footsteps echoes against the stone as you step inside the abbey gates. Not loudly, nothing here is loud, but in that kind of whispery, doubled-back way that makes you suddenly aware of how heavy your shoes actually are. The morning mist clings to your cloak, and the stones beneath you are slick, older than the village you left behind. A raven on the wall tilts its head as though judging your attempt at solemnity. You'd glare back, but you're a guest here now, and guests are supposed to look humble. This abbey has been standing for centuries, its walls patched, repatched, and patched again with slightly different shades of gray. Each stone is a quiet reminder that monks rarely move quickly. Not with their prayers, not with their food, and definitely not with their construction projects. If you were hoping for a medieval version of an HGTV time-lapse renovation, you've come to the wrong century. The air inside is colder, filled with the smell of beeswax candles and last night's firewood smoke, thin and drifting. You pass under a carved arch where saints peer down with worn faces, softened by time and maybe, just maybe, by the hands of nervous monks who touched them for comfort in the night. A bell rings, not a frantic, drop everything kind of bell, but a single low note that seems to vibrate more in your bones than in your ears. This is the call to morning prayer. You follow the sound into the chapel, where rows of wooden stalls line the walls. The monks are already there, their hoods low, their hands folded. No one is talking. Of course no one is talking. It's a silent abbey. Words are rationed here like sugar in a very stingy household. And here's your cheeky warning. You probably won't make it through this day. Don't worry. Not because anything dramatic will happen. Simply because this kind of life moves so slowly, so rhythmically, that your mind will give up the fight long before the monks do. The abbot raises a hand, and voices begin to chant. It's not a performance. It's more like a tide washing in, slow, steady, with harmonies that feel older than you can wrap your head around. The fact, Gregorian chant, the music you're hearing, was standardized in the medieval church around the 9th century. Imagine hymns as the medieval version of Spotify's chill playlist, only without shuffle mode and with stricter licensing agreements. One monk coughs, another shifts in his seat. That's the drama. Blink and you miss it, and yet, strangely, you feel pulled in. The cadence of Latin you don't understand still seems to calm you. Which is the point. These men spend their lives shaping silence and sound until both feel holy. Obscure tidbit. Some monasteries in Northern Europe had rules about when monks could sneeze in chapel. Yes, really. Timing mattered. The wrong moment and you'd be that guy, forever remembered in the margins of the monastery records as Brother Sneeze. Historians still debate whether the rule of Saint Benedict, the guiding code of monastic life, was truly followed as strictly as the texts claim. After all, humans are humans. Sometimes you fast a little less, sometimes you nap a little more. But here, this morning, it feels absolute. You breathe in the chill, the candlelight, the sense that the world outside has already disappeared. This abbey, for better or worse, is your entire universe. And before we slip deeper into this quiet world, let me gently remind you, if you're listening along, tap like, maybe subscribe. It helps us keep these sleepy stories alive. And if you want, drop a comment. Where in the world are you listening and what time is it there? It's always fascinating to imagine these monks unknowingly keeping you company across centuries and continents. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You follow the monks out of the chapel. They don't look at you, not really. They've seen plenty of visitors before, and besides, the point is not to be seen. The point is to vanish into routine. You shuffle along stone corridors, feeling your cloak brush against the walls. Somewhere bread is baking. Somewhere a quill scratches on parchment. Somewhere a monk fights the very human urge to yawn in the middle of prayer. You almost smile. Almost. The day begins not with coffee, forget that, but with labor. You're handed a basket and motioned toward the garden. No one explains. No one needs to. Monks live by rhythm, not by instructions. The garden sits within cloister walls, rectangular, neat, with pathways of worn gravel. A small fountain in the center trickles faintly, its sound like someone slowly filling a cup and forgetting to stop. You kneel beside a row of cabbages. They're massive, oddly regal, as if each one is a quiet monk of its own, bowing its green head. You tug at weeds, the damp soil clinging to your fingers. One monk near you hums under his breath, faint, like he doesn't even notice he's doing it. You glance at him. He glances back. You both look away immediately because eye contact feels like a scandal. The fact: monasteries weren't just spiritual centers, they were economic hubs. They grew food, brewed ale, copied manuscripts, and sometimes even ran hospitals. To live here was to live in a self-sustaining bubble. Monks were the original do-it-yourself YouTube tutorials, except their channel was Eternal Life, and their subscribers were God and maybe the occasional local lord. A rooster crows somewhere beyond the walls. You realize that while the Abbey is technically about silence, the place is not actually silent. You hear bees in the lavender, the crunch of sandals on gravel, the faint creak of wood from a cart being pushed. Silence here means the absence of chatter, not the absence of sound. Obscure tidbit: in some monasteries, monks communicated using a complex sign language. Want bread? Tap your fist to your mouth. Want beer? Curl your fingers as though holding a mug. This prevented the sin of idle words, though one imagines the monks still found loopholes, like modern kids sneaking emojis into classroom laptops. You shift to another row of plants. The sun climbs higher, and light begins to spread across the cloister in bands of pale gold. Your back aches. Your knees complain. You begin to understand why medieval illustrations often show saints sitting down. They were probably just tired of kneeling in the garden. Historians still debate whether the average monk's day was as peaceful as it appears in the rule, or if it was far more chaotic, with endless interruptions from visitors, disputes over property, or simply brothers grumbling over who last watered the herbs. And yet, for now, you feel the rhythm of it. You pull weeds. You breathe the scent of earth. You hear the fountain. For a moment it feels timeless. Then the bell rings again. This time it's sharper, more insistent. Not for prayer, this is the work bell. Everyone stands, stretches, adjusts their robes. You follow, basket in hand, through an arched doorway into a long stone hall. Wooden tables line the walls, covered in tools. Quills, knives, half-finished bindings. Ah, the scriptorium. This is where the monks copy manuscripts, each letter drawn as carefully as if it might be their last. You sit, hesitantly, at an empty stool. The parchment in front of you smells faintly of sheep. The ink is thick, dark, waiting. A monk nearby leans over and dips his quill, beginning the slow, precise work of making the Bible look like the Bible. You try to copy him. Your hand shakes. Your line wobbles. Congratulations, you've ruined the first letter. But don't worry, no one is watching. At least you think no one is watching. The scriptorium is colder than the garden. Your breath fogs faintly in front of you. A window lets in pale light, just enough to strain your eyes. It's said that some monks went blind after years of this work. You blink. Hard. You try not to think about it. Your quill scratches. The sound is steady, almost soothing. Hours pass. Or maybe it's minutes. Time here is strange, stretched and folded like dough. And just as your hand begins to cramp, a bell rings again. Thank heavens, or, well, thank the Abbey schedule. Work is done for now. You set the quill down. You flex your fingers. You realize you are, against all odds, beginning to feel at home here. The silence is no longer strange. It is, in its own way, a kind of company. You leave the scriptorium with ink still smudged faintly across your fingertips. The bell has shifted the rhythm once again, and you shuffle down another corridor, this one dim, lit only by the occasional slit of sunlight sneaking through narrow windows. The stones here seem older, darker, as though centuries of monks have carried their weariness along these very steps. Your stomach rumbles. Not loudly, but enough to remind you that breakfast has not happened in the modern sense. Here, meals are sparse, modest, carefully measured. Food is not meant to be a pleasure, it's meant to be fuel. Still, fuel is fuel, and right now you'll take whatever the Abbey kitchen offers. You enter the refectory, the long dining hall. Wooden tables stretch in two neat lines, worn smooth by elbows and prayerful hands. The walls are bare except for one crucifix, carved simply, watching over every bite. A monk ladles out pottage, a thick, grainy stew into wooden bowls. The smell is earthy, warm, with the faintest hint of herbs from the garden you were just pulling weeds in. Bread sits in baskets at the center of the tables. Dark, dense, more brick than loaf, but it's bread all the same. You sit. You do not speak. No one does. Meals here are eaten in silence, except for one voice. At the far end of the hall, a monk begins to read aloud from a text. His Latin rises and falls with slow steadiness. You can't understand the words, but the cadence alone is strangely comforting. This is the medieval version of a podcast. Eat your pottage while someone reads from Augustine, or perhaps from the Abbey's own chronicle. The fact: many monasteries maintained a lector at meals, someone who read while others ate. The idea was simple. Food nourished the body, words nourished the soul. Multitasking, medieval style. You take a spoonful of pottage. It's hot, thicker than you expect, with the taste of barley, maybe onions. Not delicious, but grounding. Each bite feels earned. You tear a chunk of bread with your hands. It crumbles unevenly, and a few crumbs fall onto the table. You brush them aside quickly, suddenly aware that somewhere in the Abbey's rulebook is probably a line about wasting food. Obscure tidbit. Some monasteries had rules about how to chew quietly. Imagine that centuries before modern ASMR eating videos, monks were perfecting their own silent versions. Whether they succeeded, no one can say, but surely there was at least one Brother Crunchy who ruined it for everyone. The meal ends not with chatter, not with lingering, but with a single prayer. Bowls are collected. Bread baskets vanish. The monks rise as one and leave, their sandals sliding faintly across the stone. You follow, back into the cloister, where light now fills the open courtyard. The sun is climbing, the sky clearing. Birds dart between the eaves. A monk sweeps the cloister walkways, each stroke of the broom slow, deliberate, like part of a prayer. You begin to notice how repetition rules everything here. Bells mark the hours, prayers mark the pauses. Labor fills the spaces in between. There is no hurry, and yet, paradoxically, no real rest either. You are always moving toward the next small act of devotion. Historians sometimes call this rhythm ora et labora. Pray and work. It's the pulse of monastic life. And as strange as it feels to you now, you suspect it might just be the secret to why these abbeys endured for centuries. Routine is harder to topple than passion. For a moment, you walk alone along the cloister arcade. The arches frame the garden like windows into another, slower world. Your footsteps echo, and you realize the Abbey is teaching you something, though you can't name it yet. Maybe patience, maybe humility, or maybe just how to eat barley stew without grimacing. The afternoon begins with study, at least for the literate monks. And luckily or unluckily, you've been handed a book. Not just any book. A massive, leather-bound tome. Its pages thick. Its script neat, dark, uncompromising. You place it carefully on a wooden lectern, the wood creaking under its weight. This is not casual reading. This is slow reading. The kind where every line feels like a riddle, and every riddle requires hours to untangle. You trace the letters with your eyes. Latin again. Always Latin. The words feel ancient, layered with centuries of thought. You find yourself drifting, your mind wandering off to the faint sound of bees outside, the pattern of dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight crossing the page. The fact: monasteries were the great preservers of knowledge in medieval Europe. Without them, much of classical literature might have vanished. Cicero, Virgil, Aristotle, all of these passed through monastic hands, copied letter by letter. Monks didn't just pray. They archived civilization. Obscure tidbit. Some monks doodled in the margins. Yes, serious, solemn scribes occasionally slipped in a tiny drawing of a dragon, or a rabbit with a sword, or even rude caricatures of their fellow brothers. Imagine laboring for months on a manuscript, then leaving behind a medieval meme in the corner just to make yourself smile. You fight the urge to laugh. Not loudly, just that kind of warm laugh at the idea of Brother John, in the year 1120, carefully illuminating a saint's halo and then sketching a farting cow in the corner for balance. But you press on. You try to read. The Latin tangles you. Your eyes close, open, close again. Perhaps this is the point. Perhaps books here are less about comprehension and more about endurance. The hours slip. A bell rings. Not sharp, not urgent, just steady, inevitable. The sound folds the page closed for you. You rise carefully, setting the book aside. Now comes something more practical, the workshops. You enter a side hall where monks are engaged in craft. One carves wood, shaping a small crucifix. Another stirs pigments in small bowls, grinding minerals into powder for paint. A third tends to beeswax, shaping candles. The room smells of sap, smoke, honey, stone dust. The fact: abbeys were centers of production. They didn't just pray, they created. From wine to parchment to stained glass, monastic communities fueled not only their own survival but the culture of their surrounding villages. Obscure tidbit. In some monasteries, bees were considered holy workers, their hives tended with almost spiritual reverence. After all, bees produced wax for candles, which in turn lit the prayers of the faithful. One could say the monks saw bees as tiny, winged monks themselves, busy, disciplined, tireless. You watch a monk dip a wick into hot wax, again and again, slowly building up the layers of a candle. The rhythm is hypnotic. Dip, lift, cool, repeat. The candle grows thicker, stronger, one thin coat at a time. It feels like a metaphor for this entire life. Layer upon layer, day upon day, until a shape emerges. You lean against the wall, the quiet seeping into you. For the first time, you realize you are not restless anymore. You are simply here. The bell rings once more. Evening is coming. The bell rings again. Not the sharp clang of a city clock tower, but the softer, almost apologetic sound of a hand-pulled rope striking bronze. You are just finishing the washing of bowls in the Abbey kitchen, your hands wrinkled from the chill water, when the tone drifts across the stone corridor. You pause. A drop falls from your sleeve to the floor, and you know what comes next. The day is carved into neat slices, each one marked by bells that feel less like alarms and more like nudges, gentle reminders that your life no longer belongs to minutes or hours, but to an ancient order of rhythm. You move down the corridor, your sandals scuffing. The walls echo faintly, and for a moment you can hear only yourself, your own breath, your own quiet presence. The others are already gathering, like rivers running into the same sea. The Abbey church is not bustling. It never bustles. It simply waits, still and solid, a darkened sanctuary that remembers far more prayers than it does faces. You slip into the choir stalls. Wood creaks under your weight, polished smooth by centuries of elbows leaning in tired reverence. The chants begin. Low voices, almost humming, weaving in and out. The Latin words slip past you. Perhaps you do not understand all of them, but you feel their shape, their rise and fall, the way they roll around the arches overhead like mist circling rafters. Historical fact of the moment. In most Benedictine abbeys, monks were required to pray 7 times a day, called the Divine Office. It was less about dramatic worship, more about the steady drip of prayer through time, like drops of water carving a stone basin. The service continues. You fight the urge to yawn. It's not irreverence. It's just the soft lull of repetition. Even monks sometimes nod it off. There's a record of one abbot scolding his brothers for holy slumber in the choir. You can imagine him grumbling. If you must sleep, at least don't snore through matins. The chanting winds down, and silence pools again. But here's a small cultural tidbit. Some abbeys kept cats inside the church, not only to chase mice but also to lend a strange sense of comfort. The monks never wrote about their pets in detail, but you can picture a striped little hunter slinking between benches, curling near a candle, purring softly while hymns echoed above. Scholars are still uncertain whether monks saw these animals as companions or simply as useful workers. Either way, you can't help but imagine stroking a furry back during a long vigil and thinking, this is the closest thing to luxury I'll ever get. The bell ends the hour. You rise again. You'll probably do this another 6 times before the day closes. And you realize, with that faint smile of sleepy sarcasm, you really don't need a wristwatch here. The bell has already colonized your soul. The Abbey kitchen calls you back. And if you thought medieval monastic food meant banquets, I have disappointing news. You're greeted with porridge. Again, a gray, thick mush ladled into bowls with the resigned grace of men who gave up flavor for salvation. You take your wooden spoon, sit with the brothers, and stir lazily, watching steam curl upward. Historical fact for this section. Most monks followed dietary rules that banned meat of four-legged animals. Fish, however, slipped through the loophole. That meant endless variations of salted, boiled, dried, or stewed fish. You'll never look at a carp the same way again. Today, though, it's not fish. It's beans. Boiled until they collapse into something that might once have been called food. You eat slowly, not because you savor, but because silence at meals is required. Instead of chatter, a single monk reads aloud from a heavy book, scripture, a sermon, sometimes a saint's biography. His voice drones on, steady, deliberate. Imagine having an audiobook subscription, except there's only one title, and it's 700 pages long. You chew, you listen, and occasionally you think about bread. Flat, hard, dark bread that cracks at the crust but softens if you dunk it in porridge. Bread so plain it makes you nostalgic for plain water. And yet, oddly, it's comforting. Everyone eats together. Nobody competes. Nobody asks what you're doing after supper. Because everyone is doing the same thing. Praying, working, existing. It's a kind of unity that modern dinner parties, with their awkward small talk and comparisons, could never dream of achieving. Here's your obscure tidbit. In some monasteries, monks brewed their own ale and wine, carefully measured and rationed. Not for drunkenness, heaven forbid, but because water wasn't always safe. Your single mug of weak ale is both medicine and mealtime companion. Think of it as the medieval version of a lukewarm seltzer, minus the trendy flavors. One monk across the table sneezes. Everyone stays silent. You don't say bless you. Not here. That would be words. You just pass him the loaf, and he nods in thanks. Quiet solidarity. Historians still debate whether all abbeys strictly enforced this level of silence at every meal, or if some allowed murmured conversation on feast days. But here, in this sleepy abbey, silence is the rule. You feel the weight of it, like a soft woolen blanket pressing down over the room. You finish your bowl. The reader closes the book with a dull thump. Another bell rings. Another hour passes. You stand. Another part of the endless cycle ticks on. You sigh, thinking to yourself, ironically, that perhaps heaven is just one long day of repeating schedules. But you keep walking, because the bell told you to. After the meal, the abbey spills you back into its long cloisters. The air smells faintly of damp stone and old wood, a scent that never quite leaves. You trail your hand along the wall as you walk, feeling the cool ridges beneath your fingers. The stone has been here longer than you, longer than the reader at meals, longer than the sleepy bell rope. It will still be here when all of you are long gone. This hour is for labor, not glamorous labor, not heroic, but steady, repetitive, useful. You make your way into the garden. Raised beds are lined with winter cabbages, turnips poking their heads like shy children, herbs nodding in the breeze. The abbey garden is the quiet heart of survival. No supermarkets, no app delivery, just dirt, hands, and hope. Historical fact of this hour. Monasteries were often centers of agricultural innovation. They experimented with drainage, crop rotation, even new plant varieties. If medieval Europe had a research lab, it was probably an abbey garden. You bend low, pulling weeds. The sun slips past gray clouds, and for a brief moment, the light makes the wet leaves shine like emerald glass. Your back complains. Your knees mutter their grievances. You keep going. The rhythm of weeding, planting, and turning soil becomes oddly hypnotic. Like kneading bread or folding laundry, it soothes you into forgetfulness. You glance at Brother Thomas nearby, hunched and muttering to himself. Not words of prayer exactly. He's scolding a stubborn patch of weeds. You smile. Even monks need to vent. And here's your obscure tidbit. In some records, monks are noted to have kept bees, not only for honey but for beeswax to make candles. Imagine rows of hives buzzing at the far end of the garden, monks in their rough hoods shuffling nervously around them, hoping the bees believe in peace as much as the rule of Saint Benedict. Scholars still debate whether these bees were considered communal property or whether some monks secretly treated them with special care, sneaking them scraps of extra herbs. It's a sweet thought, literally. The garden hums. The bell will ring again soon. But for a moment you pause, leaning on your spade, realizing that the world outside may be noisy, violent, and loud. But here the loudest sound is a bee deciding whether you are a flower. You sigh. You probably won't make it through this day without aching shoulders. But you do feel calmer than you expected. Afternoon drifts in, pale and slow. Clouds bunch together in the sky, fat with the promise of rain. The Abbey library waits for you now. Its door creaks open with exaggerated drama, like an actor who knows the importance of their entrance. Inside, wood, parchment, ink. The smell is unmistakable. A mixture of dust, wax, and faint animal hide from the vellum pages. You sit at a long table. It wobbles just slightly. A stack of manuscripts leans against the wall, tied with cord, their bindings more precious than gold in a world where books are labor itself. Historical fact here. Monasteries preserved vast amounts of ancient texts by copying them. Without the patient, ink-stained monks hunched over desks, whole swaths of classical literature would have vanished forever. You take up a quill. The feather tickles your hand. The ink is thick, slow, almost syrupy. You begin to copy. Not words you invented, but words someone else once thought worthy. Each letter curves, deliberate, precise. A mistake means scraping the parchment with a knife, praying you don't tear it. You hunch forward, tongue caught between your teeth in concentration. Brother Matthew coughs across the table. You glare. He doesn't notice. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some manuscripts from monasteries contain doodles in the margins. Tiny sketches of cats, or knights fighting snails, or monks themselves falling asleep at their desks. Proof that even the most devout scribes needed a little rebellion against monotony. Historians still debate whether these doodles were tolerated or scolded. But when you see a little medieval drawing of a grumpy cat scratching a monk's face, you can't help but think, someone back then had your exact sense of humor. The light fades. A scribe lights a candle, wax dripping down in golden rivulets. Shadows tremble across the page. Your eyelids grow heavier with each line you copy. The steady scratch of quills is like rainfall, soft, persistent, sleep-inducing. You wonder if the very act of copying was meant to break down the self, to make you forget yourself in the act of repeating what has already been said. Or maybe it was just the medieval version of paperwork. Either way, your neck is stiff, your eyes are dry, and you know the bell will soon call you to prayer again. Still, you smile faintly. Somewhere in the distant future, someone might read these very lines you copied. And they might think, whoever wrote this probably needed a nap. The bell pulls you back from the scratch of quills. Vespers approaches, the evening prayer, when the day begins its slow descent into quiet. You set aside your manuscript, flexing stiff fingers, and follow the other monks out of the library. The air outside feels colder now, carrying with it a damp breeze that smells of wet earth and wood smoke. The church greets you again, its tall silence unchanged. Candles flicker, smoke curling toward rafters darkened by centuries of breath and prayer. You slide onto the same hard bench as before. The chants begin. Not loud, not operatic, but steady, even, like waves breaking on a shore. Historical fact here. The cycle of prayers, called the Divine Office, structured nearly every hour of a monk's life. 7 times a day, bells and chants carve time into manageable pieces. If the modern world has calendars and deadlines, the monastery had its hours of prayer. You hum along. Your stomach grumbles faintly, protesting the small meal earlier. You ignore it. The rhythm of the voices pulls you into something deeper. For a moment, you forget you are cold, forget your stiff back, forget everything but the rising and falling of sound. A joke of the Abbey comes to mind, whispered only when no one important listens. Monks measure life not in days but in bells. Miss one, and you might as well have vanished. You smirk silently, then return your face to serenity. Your obscure tidbit for this section. In some abbeys, the bells were rung by pulling ropes with such effort that monks occasionally fell over when the bell suddenly swung back. Imagine a devout brother being yanked 3 feet into the air by divine machinery. Heavenly slapstick. Historians still debate whether monks always found this embarrassing or whether they secretly laughed about it later in the cloister. You like to believe laughter found its way in, even in a place of silence. The chant fades. Evening presses harder against the windows. The abbey grows darker, the cold seeping into your sleeves. You breathe slowly, realizing that here, life isn't measured in news, gossip, or emails. It's measured in candle stubs and shadows. And you probably won't make it through this day without yawning through prayer. But that's fine. God forgives yawns. Probably. When prayers end, supper follows. Don't get too excited, the monks don't. You shuffle to the refectory again, benches groaning as they accept your weight. Tonight's meal. A little bread, a little broth, maybe beans if fortune smiles. Smells plain, it tastes plainer, but it fills the gap. Historical fact here. Many monasteries forbade the eating of meat except for the sick. Fish, beans, and vegetables carried the burden of daily protein. If you wanted steak, well, you picked the wrong vocation. The hall is lit by a few wavering candles. Shadows ripple across faces bowed over bowls. Once again, one monk reads aloud from a holy text. Tonight's choice is slower, perhaps intentionally chosen to lull you further. You chew, half listening, half drifting. The candlelight blurs, and the words roll together. A thought tickles your mind. This is the medieval version of a podcast dinner. Endless voice, steady drone, paired with simple food. The only thing missing is a sponsorship ad for parchment. Your obscure tidbit. In some monasteries, monks were allowed to drink ale or beer with meals, not strong, but enough to provide calories and hydration when water seemed unsafe. Picture this: a refectory of solemn monks, each with a humble mug of beer, eyes downcast, hands folded. It's reverent, yes, but you can't help thinking it also looks like the world's quietest pub. Historians still debate exactly how much alcohol was consumed daily. Some estimates are surprisingly high, suggesting monks may have lived in a state of mild perpetual buzz. But considering how calm and orderly their lives remained, maybe they just had better tolerance than you. The meal ends. Dishes are cleared. Silence lingers. Outside, darkness thickens like velvet pulled over the world. You step out into the cloister once more, cool air brushing your cheeks. A crescent moon hovers above the roofline, pale and steady. For a moment you stop. You listen. The Abbey hums softly, the kind of hum you only notice when everything else is absent. You breathe, realizing the day is slipping into its final hours. The rhythm of bells, the scratch of quills, the ache of knees in prayer, woven together, they carry you into night. You probably won't make it through this night without dreaming of bread. But the Abbey won't mind. The night stretches deeper, and with it comes Compline, the final prayer before bed. You walk slowly to the church, your feet tracing the same worn path as countless brothers before you. The stars above seem sharper than usual, scattered across a black sky like spilled salt. For once, you glance up and allow yourself to marvel. Even monks, after all, occasionally pause for the sky. Inside the church, the air is cooler still. Candles burn lower, their flames stuttering. The chanting this time feels softer, slower, as though even the voices themselves are preparing for rest. Historical fact here. Compline often included the singing of the hymn Salve Regina, a piece so enduring it has survived into the present day. Imagine words sung by monks 1,000 years ago, still echoing in cathedrals, chapels, and monasteries today. You whisper along, though your throat feels dry. The Latin flows like water, words you don't entirely understand, yet feel. They roll over you, seep into you, like the texture of sleep beginning to press down gently on your eyelids. You glance sideways. The monk nearest you sways slightly, as if balanced precariously between devotion and dozing. You sympathize. Thou shalt not nap in church is not carved into stone, but it might as well be. Tonight's obscure tidbit. In some monasteries, before sleeping, monks sprinkled holy water on their beds, not for hygiene but for spiritual protection. Imagine treating bedbugs with blessings. A medieval solution, though perhaps not the most effective one. Historians still debate whether monks truly slept peacefully after Compline, or whether the thin bedding and cold stone walls meant constant tossing and turning. The romantic idea of monks drifting into saintly dreams is charming, but your back says otherwise. The service ends. A final bow, a shuffle of sandals, and then you return to your chamber. The Abbey falls silent once more, the kind of silence that hums in your ears until it feels almost alive. You probably won't make it through this night without snoring. And if you do, someone else certainly will. Your bed awaits, or something resembling a bed at least. A thin straw mattress, a simple wool blanket, and a wooden frame. The chamber is small, no larger than a cupboard, its walls bare except for a wooden cross nailed slightly askew. You sit down carefully, the straw rustling beneath you. The air here smells faintly of wool, dust, and damp stone. You pull the blanket over yourself, and for the first time today you are fully still. The day has been carved into segments. Bells, meals, prayers, silence, and now it collapses into rest. Historical fact here. Monks often woke at midnight for another prayer service called matins. Their sleep was intentionally broken, believed to keep them spiritually alert. Rest was not a luxury, but a tool for devotion. In modern terms, it's like setting an alarm for 2 a.m. on purpose, except without snooze. You close your eyes, listening to the muffled quiet. Your breath slows, your shoulders drop. Somewhere outside, an owl calls once, its voice swallowed by the night. And then you hear it. The bell. Again. A hollow sound that crawls across stone and into your bones. Midnight matin summons you. You sigh, swing your feet to the cold floor, and shuffle into the corridor. The obscure tidbit. Some monasteries employed a monk called the dormitorium waker, whose sole job was to rouse brothers for midnight prayers. Picture a man with a lantern creeping along hallways, nudging the half-asleep with a firm poke. Alarm clocks, medieval edition. Historians still debate how willingly monks embraced this broken sleep cycle. Some argued it kept the soul awake for God. Others, surely, must have muttered complaints into their blankets. You lean toward the latter. The church feels even more solemn at night. No daylight seeps in, only candlelight, faint and trembling. The chanting begins again, low and measured, as if the voices themselves are half asleep. And perhaps they are. You stand, swaying slightly, murmuring words into the shadows. Your eyes feel heavy, your stomach growls faintly, your legs ache. But the rhythm holds you. You probably won't make it through this prayer without imagining your bed again. But then, maybe that longing was always part of the devotion. Matins ends eventually, as all things must. The church doors open again, letting the cool night air spill in. You shuffle back through the cloister, your sandals whispering across the stones. Every movement feels heavier, as though gravity itself doubled while you were chanting. You lie down again on your straw mattress. Sleep comes quickly now, not because the bed is comfortable, but because your body demands it. It folds you under like a tide. And yet morning comes too soon. The bell rings again, the faint gray light of dawn crawling through tiny slits of windows. Lauds, the morning prayer. You rise, rub your eyes, and pull yourself upright. Historical fact here. Lauds, in the medieval Benedictine tradition, was often prayed at dawn to greet the rising sun. Symbolically, it represented Christ as light breaking through darkness. In other words, you're dragged from bed for a sunrise metaphor. The air is chill, your breath faintly visible. The Abbey seems to breathe with you, its walls holding centuries of morning routines. You imagine monks from decades past making the same reluctant walk, their sandals slapping in a rhythm identical to yours. A cheeky reminder. Coffee won't be invented in Europe for centuries. You're on your own. The obscure tidbit. Some monasteries trained roosters to serve as natural alarm clocks, ensuring the monks rose on time. Though roosters are less precise than bells, they are more insistent. Imagine the chaos of an abbey courtyard at dawn. Feathers flying, monks grumbling. Historians still debate whether dawn prayers were seen as joyful or simply obligatory. Were monks truly exalting the sun, or silently wishing they could go back to bed. No clear answer, though your eyelids suggest the latter. You kneel in the church once more, the chants circling upward, fragile as the first rays of light slipping through high windows. For a moment, you feel the pull of something beyond exhaustion. A calm, slow awe. The day begins again. You probably won't make it through this morning without yawning mid-prayer. Rest assured, you won't be the only one. Lauds gives way to the first true stirrings of daily life. After prayers, monks file into the refectory for a small morning meal. The room smells faintly of baked bread and herbs. Bowls are set out, and the portions are modest: bread, perhaps a little cheese, sometimes watered ale or a warm broth. You sit at the long wooden table, the surface scarred by knives and years of use. A monk stands at a lectern, reading scripture aloud, eating in silence while someone reads. A peculiar combination of nourishment and lecture. It's like a medieval podcast you didn't subscribe to. Historical fact here. Meals in monasteries were often taken in silence, with one monk assigned to read aloud from sacred texts or the lives of saints. This tradition emphasized humility, reflection, and community. It also meant you couldn't ask someone to pass the salt. The bread is coarse but filling, the cheese slightly tangy, the broth warm enough to soften your chilled fingers around the bowl. You savor it quietly. Silence makes every flavor louder, in a way. The obscure tidbit. Medieval monks sometimes used sign language during meals to request simple things: salt, bread, water, without breaking silence. Entire sets of gestures existed for daily needs, long before modern sign language developed. A silent, medieval charades game. Historians still debate whether the silent meals were genuinely peaceful or simply frustrating. Some argue the silence heightened reflection. Others believe it amplified stomach growls into a kind of monastic percussion section. You finish your meal and fold your hands. The reading continues, slow and steady. Words float past you like drifting clouds. You find yourself half following, half dreaming. A saint travels across distant lands in the story, but in your mind, the saint is mostly searching for a nap. When the bowls are cleared, you rise with the others. Silence remains. The Abbey breathes again in its strange rhythm of prayers, meals, and pauses. You probably won't make it through this morning without glancing longingly at the doorway, wondering if anyone would notice if you just slipped out into the sun. Breakfast, or what passes for breakfast, is finished. You file out of the refectory and step into the cloister again. The morning light is gentler now, spilling across the stone in long, thin rectangles. Shadows of arches stretch like arms across the courtyard grass. This is the work period of the day. Ora et labora. Pray and work. The two halves of monastic life. You'll do plenty of both. Some monks go to the fields, sleeves rolled, to turn soil and tend to crops. Others slip into workshops, carpentry, smithing, or copying manuscripts. You're handed a broom and directed toward the scriptorium. Sweeping isn't glamorous, but it means you'll overhear the scratching of quills, the faint whispers of monks murmuring Latin as they copy words letter by letter. Historical fact here. Monasteries preserved vast amounts of classical knowledge during the Middle Ages by copying manuscripts. Without them, much of ancient philosophy, medicine, and literature might have been lost entirely. In short, monks were the original data backup system. The broom swishes along the stone floor. Dust rises in lazy clouds, illuminated by beams of morning light. The sound of quills is steady, like rain on parchment. The obscure tidbit. Some medieval manuscripts contain little doodles. Tiny rabbits in the margins, knights fighting snails, monks making sarcastic comments in Latin. Even in silence, scribes found ways to sneak humor into their work. Imagine centuries of readers being ambushed by a medieval meme. Historians still debate whether scribes enjoyed their endless copying or despised it. Was it meditative like knitting, or mind-numbing like typing out, "I will not fall asleep 1,000 times"? The evidence is fittingly inconclusive. You lean on your broom and watch the letters forming, black ink drying against creamy vellum. The words seem eternal, but the men making them yawn, stretch, and occasionally smudge a line. Humanity preserved, flaws and all. And you probably won't make it through this sweeping shift without daydreaming about those doodles. Knights fighting snails do sound oddly heroic. The morning work drifts on. Time loses shape in the steady rhythm of effort. Quills scratch. Dust settles. The Abbey hums in its quiet industry. Eventually, the bell tolls again, calling you back to the church for the next office. Terse, the third hour of the day, roughly mid-morning. You set the broom aside and shuffle out, shoulders a little sore, but grateful for the break. The church is cooler than the sunlit cloister, its shadows deep and still. Candles burn with a faint hiss. You kneel again, words rising in chant. Historical fact here. Terce was often associated with invoking the Holy Spirit, marking a pause in labor to reconnect with prayer. The structure of the day kept monks moving between work and worship, preventing both idleness and overwork. A medieval version of Take 5. Your knees complain quietly as you kneel. The chants are steady, but your mind wanders. You notice the faint cracks in the stone wall, the cool draft sneaking through. The obscure tidbit. In some monasteries, beeswax candles were reserved for important liturgy, while ordinary tallow candles, smokier and smellier, were used for everyday services. Monks may have had to endure clouds of smelly candle smoke during routine prayers. Spiritual devotion mixed with ode to barnyard. Historians still debate how strictly prayer times were enforced in smaller monasteries. Some evidence suggests rural abbeys bent the rules depending on weather, farming needs, or sheer fatigue. It's possible not every terce was perfectly on time. You breathe slowly, letting the chant wash over you. Your eyelids dip once, twice. The rhythm is hypnotic, as if the abbey itself is rocking you gently towards sleep. And you probably won't make it through this hour without your head nodding forward, startling you awake at least once. The monk beside you doesn't notice, or maybe he does and is politely pretending. Terce fades, and the service dissolves into silence. The monks file out once again, sandals scuffing across stone. You follow, drawn by routine, drifting along as if the abbey itself is carrying you. Back to work. This time you're sent outside into the gardens. The air feels warmer, softened by the scent of damp earth and herbs. Rows of vegetables stretch neatly in the sunlight. Onions, leeks, beans, cabbages with leaves curling like shields. Beyond them, an herb patch hums with bees. Historical fact here. Monastic gardens were divided into functional sections, one for food, one for medicinal herbs, one sometimes for quiet contemplation. They were miniature ecosystems, sustaining both the body and the spirit. You're handed a small basket and a pair of shears. Your task: gathering herbs for the infirmary. Mint, sage, rosemary. You clip carefully, the scent rising sharp and fresh. The obscure tidbit: monks occasionally brewed ale of herbs, not just for medicine, but as a mild, restorative drink. Some recipes included fennel, parsley, or even wormwood. Medieval energy drinks, if you will, except they probably didn't make you run faster. Historians still debate how effective these herbal remedies were. Some may have offered real benefits. Others were more symbolic, rooted in humoral theory. Did rosemary tea really balance your hot, dry temperament? Or was it just an excuse for another warm cup? The sun shifts higher. Bees weave lazily between blossoms. Your basket fills slowly, stems poking out like green quills. You pause to stretch your back, listening to the distant sound of hammers in the workshops, the echo of chants still lingering in your mind. And you probably won't make it through this gardening shift without sneaking a leaf of mint to chew, pretending it's for quality testing. The garden's work ends, and you return inside, carrying the herb basket. A lay brother thanks you with a quiet nod, whisking it away toward the infirmary. You rub your hands together, dusting off clinging bits of earth. Now comes a pause, one of the few, time for private devotion or quiet reading. You slip into the cloister walk again. The arches frame the courtyard like a series of windows. Sunlight pours through in golden blocks. You lower yourself onto a stone bench, the chill seeping through your robes. You draw a small psalter from the shelf. Thin, worn pages, letters black against creamy parchment. You run a finger along the words, reading silently. The rhythm of the Latin presses gently against your thoughts. Historical fact here: literacy was relatively rare in medieval Europe, but most monks could read Latin to engage with scripture. Monasteries were not only religious centers but also islands of literacy in a largely oral world. The obscure tidbit: some psalters included not just prayers, but illuminated initials shaped like strange beasts or curling vines. Sometimes a monk copying them would get carried away, and a single letter might blossom into a whole miniature forest of gold leaf and dragons. Historians still debate how much leisure reading monks were actually permitted. Some evidence suggests abbots kept a tight rein, limiting texts to strictly spiritual works. But hints in library records suggest monks sometimes borrowed romances or poetry when no one was looking. Yes, medieval sneaky reading habits. The courtyard breeze stirs your sleeve. You turn another page, eyelids heavy. The letters blur, swimming in and out of focus. You try to concentrate, but the hush of the cloister and the gentle warmth of mid-morning press against your thoughts like a weighted blanket. And you probably won't make it through this private devotion without dozing off, chin against chest, the psalter slipping quietly in your lap. The sound of a bell lifts you from your drowsy reading. Time has passed, enough for shadows to stretch long in the courtyard. You rise, careful not to let the psalter slide to the ground, and follow the others once more. This hour brings none, the afternoon prayer. It is short, quieter, almost like a punctuation mark rather than a full sentence. The chant feels softer now, the monks' voices carrying a hushed, worn quality, as if even the chants themselves are getting sleepy. Historical fact here: the canonical hour of none, around the 9th hour of the day, about 3 p.m., was traditionally linked to Christ's death on the cross. In the medieval Abbey, however, It also marked the transition from heavy labor back toward evening quiet. You file out, and the Abbey seems to exhale. Work slows. Tools are set aside. In the kitchens, pots are stirred one last time before the meal. A faint aroma wafts through the stone halls. Something earthy, perhaps lentil stew, with a sprinkle of herbs you yourself gathered earlier. Obscure tidbit. Some abbeys allowed a splash of beer or ale with supper, but not too much. Drunken monks were frowned upon, even if the ale was barely stronger than cloudy bread water. Historians still debate how filling these evening meals were. Some records suggest 2 small meals a day sufficed. Others whisper about monks sneaking food on feast days. Nobody admits to the midnight cheese raids, but, well, human nature hasn't changed much. The meal comes. You sit in the refectory once more, bowls placed before you. The food is warm, if plain. The reader's voice fills the silence, unspooling scripture as spoons clink softly. You chew slowly, the rhythm of words and flavors settling deep into your bones. And you probably won't make it through this meal without imagining a fat loaf of bread, thickly buttered, waiting just out of reach. Evening deepens. The sky outside turns lavender, fading into shadow. You return to the church one last time for Compline, the night prayer. Candles flicker. The chant rises low and slow, like a lullaby woven from centuries. Historical fact here. Compline was designed as a prayer for protection through the night, a spiritual locking of the doors before sleep. Psalms, hymns, and the gentle antiphon to Mary often closed the day. The obscure tidbit. Some abbeys practiced a ritual called the foot washing at week's end during Compline, a symbolic act of humility. Imagine ending your Friday night not with a feast, but with someone washing your dusty toes. Different kind of party. Historians still debate whether monks always kept their silence after Compline. Officially, the Great Silence began at nightfall, but scattered notes suggest that whispers in the dormitory were not entirely unknown. After all, who can resist one last word before bed? The service ends. You file out for the final time today. The Abbey quiets until even your own breathing feels like a sound too loud. You climb the narrow staircase to the dormitory, rows of straw mattresses laid side by side, each with a simple blanket. You lie down. The stone walls hold the cool of evening. The faint scent of wax and wool lingers. A single candle sputters, then dies. Darkness folds over you like a heavy cloak. And you won't make it through the night silence awake. Your body is tired, your mind quiet, your heart lulled by a rhythm of bells and chants. The Abbey has closed its doors, and with it, the day. What began with the tolling of a bell now ends with another. Steady, reliable, like the breathing of stone itself. The hours have passed in a circle, each prayer folding neatly into the next, each step between cloister, garden, and church blending into the other until all of life feels like one long, slow hymn. You stretch out on your simple mattress, and above you, beams of wood hold the roof like steady arms. The silence is not empty. It is full, thick with the quiet weight of centuries, with the echo of chants now tucked into memory. Somewhere, far away, an owl calls once, then disappears into the night. The rhythm of the day lingers in your body. The bells, the meals, the soft shuffle of sandals over stone. Each one has become part of your breathing. The warmth of the herb garden is still on your fingertips. The taste of lentil stew still rests faintly on your tongue. The words of psalms drift gently through your thoughts, not demanding attention, just circling like the faint turning of stars. You may not know how faithful or restless the monks truly were. Historians still wonder. What we do know is this: the life here was slower, steadier, and deeply patterned, designed to quiet the mind and soften the heart. And so, as the Abbey fades into darkness, so do you. With every breath, you fall further into stillness, like water seeping into deep soil. The day has ended. Tomorrow will come much the same, but that is for another time. For now, rest. Rest as the monks did, beneath the same stars, beneath the same silence. Rest and let the world grow quiet.